You are standing in an invisible abattoir. Look closely at the faces around you. Every day you watch the quiet slaughter of the obedient. The people who play by the rules, who wait patiently for permission, who cling to the comforting lie that being fundamentally good triggers a karmic reward. They are the ones systematically devoured. They burn the midnight oil and receive the absolute least. They are the betrayed, the overlooked, the discarded. You have been sedated by a narrative designed to keep you predictable. You are programmed to believe that if you are honest, the architecture of the world will mirror your honesty. That kindness buys kindness. But deep within the cold chambers of your mind, the part you fiercely suppress at dinner parties, you know the autopsy of reality tells a different story. You know that power does not recognize morality. It only recognizes leverage. The just world fallacy is a domesticated control mechanism, a psychological fence built by the elite to keep the masses docile. There is a mathematical reason the nice guy finishes last. It is because he adheres to a script written for prey. He plays checkers while the sovereigns of reality operate on a multidimensional board mapped out 5 centuries ago by a man who stripped away the illusions of the human soul. Niccolò Machiavelli. This transmission is not for the fragile. It will not tell you that positive thinking alters gravity. This is a structural dismantling. I will show you how to rip out the programming that keeps you weak. To think like a prince is not to become evil. It is to become structurally inevitable. You learn to operate the levers of human greed, fear, and ambition, but understand the debt you incur. Once the strings are illuminated, you can never unsee the hands that pull them. You lose the luxury of ignorance. You will audit the hidden agendas in every handshake. If you cannot bear this absolute solitude, return to the anesthetic. But if you are exhausted from being a pawn, remain still. Let the surgery begin. The word should is a psychological parasite. It feeds on your leverage and leaves you paralyzed in a hallucination. People should be grateful. My superiors should recognize my silent labor. My partner should remain loyal. This singular word is the architect of your suffering. It is a fundamental denial of physics. Machiavelli wrote that a man who wishes to make a profession of goodness will inevitably come to ruin among so many who are not good. If you navigate a treacherous landscape using a map drawn by angels, you walk off a cliff. When a lamb enters a den of starving wolves, the ecosystem does not pause to applaud its moral purity. It is simply converted into calories. To assume the throne of your reality, you must violently kill the idealist within you. Strip away the high-gloss paint of society and examine the rotting wood underneath. Humans are driven by self-interest. That is the immutable baseline of social exchange theory. When someone helps you, they secure a psychological or material asset. When they follow you, they march behind the shield of security or profit you provide. Internalizing this makes you sovereign. When you permanently stop expecting flawed creatures to act like saints, you eliminate the shock of their nature. You are no longer blindsided by betrayal because it is already factored into your risk assessment. Loyalty is never a fixed character trait. Like the mercenary armies of Renaissance Italy, it is a circumstantial agreement. The second the wind of advantage changes, the contract vaporizes. The prince engineers necessity. He constructs an environment where it is overwhelmingly in their best interest to remain tethered to him. Imagine a raging fire inside a theater. The moralist drops to his knees and prays for water. The Machiavellian calculates the structural integrity of the exit and walks through it. He respects the fire's destructive capacity and maneuvers accordingly. Enforce radical realism upon your life. Audit the data. If you are broke or isolated, it is because you have not mastered the mechanics of value extraction and attraction. The idealist begs for a lighter burden. The sovereign builds a stronger spine. Drop the hallucination of what should be. Anchor yourself in what is. Without this grounding, you are building a fortress on a swamp. You cannot conquer a terrain you refuse to look at. Authenticity is the most successful trap ever designed for the modern serf. You are constantly bombarded with the mandate to show your flaws and bleed your vulnerabilities onto the public stage. This is a psychological snare. If you hand the world the unfiltered map of your insecurities, you are personally sharpening the blade they will use to cut you. The master of power understands he is not an immortal person in the public eye. He is a symbol, a meticulously curated avatar. This is not the crude act of lying. It is the sophisticated weapon of selective revelation. Carl Jung understood the necessity of the persona, the shield placed between the fragile ego and the ruthless collective. You must project the exact geometry of traits the hierarchy demands. You must appear relentlessly competent and unshakable even if your quiet decisions are calculated with chilling pragmatism. Why? Because the human animal processes reality through optics. They submit to the halo effect and authority bias. Observe the apex predators in your hierarchy. Do you know the exact texture of their private fears? No. You see the tailored armor. You hear the controlled cadence of their voice. You're looking at the mask. Because its structural integrity is flawless, you submit. If a general steps onto the battlefield and weeps authentically about his terror, his army's psychological spine snaps. His vulnerability obliterates his utility. He must wear the mask of a war god so terrified men can borrow his artificial courage. Sever your private self from your public utility. Your public persona is a psychological tool of extraction. Craft it with the precision of Versailles court politics, where composure was literal currency. If you require them to feel safe, equip the mask of the empathetic mirror. You nod and soften your gaze. If you require absolute compliance, wear the mask of the architect. You consume oxygen but offer no words, forcing them to wait for your judgment. This is functional camouflage. In the corporate arena, the victor controls the theater of leadership. The employee broadcasting exhaustion looks like prey. The one quietly delegating presents as a king. Command your narrative or your rivals will cast you as the fool. Never bleed in shark-infested waters. If the hull is breached, project supreme buoyancy. Repair the damage below the waterline in the suffocating dark. Above the surface, the ship glides like a phantom. The mask is heavy, yes, but enduring its weight is vastly superior to having your face torn off. A default emotional setting is a death sentence. To be predictable is to be prey. There are two frequencies of conflict, the arena of laws for civilized men and the arena of force for beasts. Because human laws are perpetually rigged and fragile, the sovereign must master the recourse to the beast. Machiavelli codified this as the dichotomy of the lion and the fox. The lion is pure kinetic dominance. It shatters the wolf's spine through the suffocating gravity of its presence. The fox is geometric cunning. It detects the tripwires hidden in the grass. It misdirects and manipulates angles. You cannot survive purely as the lion. If your only algorithm is brute force, you will march into a psychological ambush designed by an adversary, physically weaker but strategically vastly superior. You cannot survive purely as the fox. If your currency is deceit and complex riddles, you will eventually be cornered by a wolf who simply rips your throat out. You must be the hybrid. Most of humanity is trapped in a biological loop. The aggressive yell, the passive weave webs of gossip. The master operates without form, embodying Sun Tzu's doctrine of water. He assesses the threat vector with ice in his veins. Is the threat a labyrinth? Is an adversary assassinating your character in the shadows? Manifest the fox. Fight them with weaponized confusion. Smile warmly as you dismantle their structural supports. Allow them to marinate in the delusion of victory until the steel jaws snap shut on their own leg. Is the threat a wolf? Are they extracting resources from your territory in broad daylight? Manifest the lion. This is the hour for a catastrophic display of absolute force. Machiavelli penned a directive that violently rejects modern morality. Men must be either caressed or completely crushed. If you inflict a minor wound, you activate their vengeance. If you obliterate them, there is no one left to retaliate. The psychological trap of proportional escalation ruins men. They trade passive-aggressive insults, creating a dedicated nemesis without removing the threat. The Medicis did not leave surviving descendants to collect blood debts. If a conflict is inevitable, ensure you are the only one who walks away. In the modern hierarchy, you do not bicker with a toxic adversary. You quietly compile a devastating dossier of their incompetence and sever them from the ecosystem entirely. Caress or crush. Be the ally they worship or the shadow they fear. Never be the minor irritant they comfortably despise. Switch between beast states with zero latency. If the environment cannot calculate whether they are dealing with a diplomat or an executioner, they will tread around you as if navigating a minefield. Your anger does not belong to you. It belongs to whoever was clever enough to trigger it. The most lethal assassin targeting the sovereign is the internal chemical cocktail of his own emotions. Emotions are archaic biological algorithms programmed for surviving predators on the savannah, fundamentally incompatible with the cold arithmetic required for modern dominance. Anger degrades strategic vision. Fear induces fatal hesitation. Love blinds the analytical eye. If I can manipulate your autonomic nervous system, I own your actions. To execute Machiavellian alchemy is to perceive your own emotional state as an external weather system. You observe the lightning, but you do not let the storm penetrate your fortress. This is the offensive power of Stoic Apatheia, the cold observer. When crises detonate, the herd regresses into frantic animals through amygdala hijacking. The architect of power inverts this response as pressure builds his core. Temperature drops. Absolute silence becomes his weapon. Visualize a high-stakes negotiation. The adversary is screaming, leaning over the table, flushed with adrenal heat. You remain perfectly rooted. You offer absolutely nothing. In that agonizing void, you have already won. Their frantic noise crashes against your stone silence. You are not feeling, you are diagnosing. Why the volume? They are terrified of losing the deal. The conclusion is absolute. You possess the structural leverage. This profound detachment allows you to wield emotions as precision instruments. You can synthesize the exact performance of rage to advance your position while your heart rate remains at a resting 60 beats per minute. That is the chasm between a biological tantrum and a weaponized tactic. Machiavelli observed, it is mathematically superior to be feared than loved. Love is a volatile asset. Humans sever it the instant it becomes inconvenient. Fear is anchored by a biological dread of punishment, possessing superior structural integrity. The superior who attempts to be the beloved friend is cannibalized by the staff. The leader who establishes absolute boundaries, whose capacity for suddenly merciless termination is known by all, is enveloped in a subtle aura of fear. And because of that gravitational pull, the ship holds its course. You are only required to project the absolute capacity for consequences. Master the tactical pause. Insert a brutal 5-second firewall before your response. In that gap, the biological animal dies and the prince assumes command. Conquer your volatile chemistry, and the external world bends. The man who refuses to stain his hands is often the silent architect of the greatest atrocities. We must dissect the illusion of morality. You are indoctrinated with a binary code. Good is absolute, bad is absolute. Machiavelli introduces a paradigm that shatters this framework. Morality is strictly relative to the outcome. It is the battle of consequentialism versus deontology, and the outcome is the only God that matters. A sovereign is never judged by the purity of his intentions. He is judged by the brutal reality of his results. If a leader clings to kindness and his moral hesitation results in the slaughter of his population, his pathological need for a clean conscience authored a genocide. If a sovereign employs surgical cruelty to execute conspirators securing a century of peace, his cruelty was the fertilizer for life. This is the crushing psychological load of the crown. You must possess the stomach to commit necessary evil to secure the architectural stability of the greater good. The sovereign solves the trolley problem without blinking because he knows his hands were stained the moment he took power. In your life, this translates to executing the ruthless decisions domesticated people endlessly avoid. It means severing a toxic blood tie to preserve your mental fortress. The Machiavellian protocol is to amputate the gangrenous limb before the infection reaches the heart. It means liquidating the employee who poisons the organization. To the untrained eye, these actions appear monstrously cold, but they are mathematically necessary. Hesitation is the silent thief of empire. Do not let guilt rot your resolve. Guilt is merely the echo of society's control mechanism vibrating in your skull. The sovereign operates under the Roman concept of imperium. The survival of the structure supersedes individual ethics. This is not a license for sadism. Sadism is inefficient and breeds unnecessary resistance. Cultivate fear, but violently avoid hatred. You bypass hatred by keeping your hands off their property and anchoring your cruelty in cold, irrefutable logic. If you destroy a man's position, lay out the exact geometry of his failure. The human psyche absorbs harsh justice. It rebels against capricious violence. View morality not as iron chains, but as a compass. You move wherever the survival of your kingdom dictates. If you march into a knife fight clutching a book of manners, you will be slaughtered by an adversary who only respects leverage. Gravity is not created by mass alone. It is created by the sheer, terrifying void that surrounds it. Value is dictated by the unforgiving laws of scarcity. The fatal error of the uninitiated is their relentless, pathetic availability. They lunge at the phone on the first vibration. They bleed their energy into the ether like a ruptured artery. Because they are as common as dirt, they are treated like dirt. Familiarity breeds profound contempt. If you demand to be treated with the reverence of a sovereign, you must master the brutal art of withdrawal. Starve the ecosystem of your presence. When you permanently occupy the room, you degrade into background furniture. But the moment you vanish, the atmospheric pressure shifts. You weaponize the Zeigarnik Effect, the human obsession with unresolved loops. Your calculated absence forces their anxiety to project a version of you far more imposing than your physical reality. In negotiation, your ultimate leverage is your absolute willingness to walk out the door. The entity that requires the agreement has already surrendered. Within your alliances, maintain an impregnable fortress of your own pursuits. Keep vast chambers of your mind locked and hidden. In dialogue, crush your impulse to over-explain. The weak vomit words to fill the silence because the void triggers their deep-seated insecurities. The architect of power deploys words like a sniper. He addresses the inquiry with a skeletal sentence and clamps his jaws shut. He forces the adversary to bear the psychological weight of the quiet. Inevitably, the tension breaks them. They will babble, leaking their hidden agendas simply to escape the silence. You absorb this classified data while offering zero return. This ruthless economy of words broadcasts a clear signal: I am the master of the void. Be the flawless, rare artifact. Refuse to be the discarded copper coin on the pavement. Force them to bleed to access your time. When you bestow it, it feels like a divine reward. When you retract it, it feels like a devastating punishment. This intermittent reinforcement creates behavioral addiction. You become the sun. When you pass behind a cloud, they shiver. But this leverage is only granted to those who possess the iron will to step back into the dark. The true prince finds his greatest strength alone in the abyss. Freedom is not a grant passed down from above. It is a territory extracted through the ruthless application of structural load. Why construct this architecture? Why endure the suffocating weight of the mask? The absolute uncompromising goal of the Machiavellian mind is total autonomy. If you do not conquer and govern the territory of your own mind, the collective will happily colonize it for you. If you do not author the script of your own existence, you will be assigned a degrading role in another man's empire as background noise. You will be the compliant worker, the mindless consumer. Machiavelli did not write his doctrines for the cogs. He wrote for the men who look at the machine and decide to own it. You are engineering an empire. To prevent it from being pillaged, you require impenetrable walls, lethal deterrence, and supreme strategy. Operating as a prince is about constructing a fortress so overwhelmingly lethal that no one dares to oppress you. Observe the masses who scream about freedom yet remain shackled to primal impulses and paralyzed by the judgment of faceless phantoms. They are dead wood violently tossed by the ocean's currents. The sovereign is the dreadnought. He commands the rudder. He shatters the waves. This ascension demands you consume total crushing responsibility for your coordinates. You strip away the luxury of blaming your lineage or macroeconomic forces. Machiavelli acknowledged that fortune dictates half of our movements, but she surrenders the other half to our absolute control. A sudden flood wiping out the valley is fortune, but the architect who mathematically engineered the concrete dikes a decade before the clouds gathered, that is virtue. That is the triumph of strategy. Cease your pathetic complaints about the rain. Pour the concrete. You're not a victim chained to the tracks of reality. You are the conductor. It will violently resist, but with the exact fulcrum the world moves. The sovereign plays a generational game. The peasant demands his dopamine spike today. The sovereign buries the seed in the dirt, absorbing the crushing boredom and the confused hatred of the herd. He understands that the absolute sovereignty of the peak is worth crawling through the mud. The algorithm is not a mirror. It is a digital pacifier designed to keep the livestock asleep in the barn. You now possess the schematics. You understand the structural necessity of the mask emotions as hijackable data and morality as a mutable tool of leverage. You know how to wield the crushing gravity of silence, seamlessly transitioning between the brute force of the lion and the shadow play of the fox. The veil has been violently torn away. You will see the cold gears grinding beneath the flesh. It is a terrifying vision and a monumental burden. Most will hike a few hundred feet, feel the terrifying drop in temperature, and scramble back down to the suffocating warmth of the sheep pen. They swallow the blue pill, preferring the slaughterhouse to the lonely hunt of the wolf. The ecosystem requires that infinite supply of sheep. but the data suggests you feel the apex predator's starvation. You are prepared to bear the load. What architecture will you construct with this vision? Will you devolve into a paranoid tyrant or rise as the merciless architect of order? If this transmission altered your baseline, understand this is merely the exoteric shell. There are doctrines of psychological warfare and deep shadow operations I mathematically prohibited from broadcasting on this server. The system actively suppresses the mechanics of absolute power to protect the herd, but you have the sustained focus of the predator. Subscribe to maintain the link. If you demand the esoteric truths, if you want to unlock the uncensored architecture that governs the shadows, strike the join button and step through the gate. Most will lack the stomach and scroll back to their anesthetizing distractions. Power is violently restricted to the few. The gate is open. We are waiting.